Hello and welcome to today's webinar on bot analytics. Keep tabs on your bots so they don't run amok. My name is Kerry Robinson. I'm VP of Conversational AI at Waterfield Technologies. Firstly, apologies, I've got a slightly sore throat today. I thought it was just hay fever, but it turns out it's COVID too. So I've got that COVID croak, but don't worry, we've done the health and safety assessment and our doctors assure us that neither pollen nor COVID is transmissible over Zoom link. So you're safe where you are. Thank you so much for joining. This presentation will run for about 35 minutes or so, and then we've got plenty of time at the end to answer any questions you might have. So feel free to use the chat. Share your comments and questions and stay around at the end, and when we can revisit or go deeper on any areas that interest you. It's great to have you here. Let's dive in. So this webinar is the first actually in a three-part series where I'm going to do a deep dive on the three elements of bot management. Bot analytics, that's the subject of today's webinar. Bot strategy, which we'll be covering in a couple of weeks with my director of bot strategy, Dan Aslett. And finally, conversation design, which will be running 2 weeks after that with my director of conversation design, Sarah Reitzmer. Now, over the last 2 decades or so that me and my team have been working in this space, a lot has changed. Customer expectations have changed. Mainly they've gone up. Customer experiences have changed. They've become more automated, more conversational, more omni-channel, and the AI technology and platforms have also evolved a lot. But one constant that me and my team have been working, and seeing in this space is what it takes to get the most out of conversational AI, whether that's a legacy IVR or an IVA as they're being called now, or text messaging or chatbot, or even applications for those smart speakers that are popping up all over our houses. The key is to have a bot management system. And by the way, I use the term bot broadly to mean IVR, IVA, chatbot, text messaging, WhatsApp, anything where a computer is trying to speak human. A bot management system recognizes that you don't just have a piece of tech, you've got a bot workforce that needs leading and managing just like your agents do. The bot management system surrounds your bots with a process of continuous improvement. It starts at the bottom with bot analytics, understanding what's going on, what are your bots doing? Then bot strategy, what could they do, what should they do, and what's it worth? And then conversation design, create an experience that customers will really love and engage with. And then finally, we deploy that new design and we start to get more data, and then the process can continue. But it all starts with data. And so that's where we'll start this three-part series. Now, before we get started, let's just do a quick poll to see where you're at. So what are your bots up to? We'll put the poll on the screen now and just pick one of these. One, I know exactly what my bots are doing and the impact they have. 2, I've got high containment, and that's good, right? Or maybe you're just not getting any complaints. Or there's some people out there that are like, reporting? What reporting? Just click whichever of these make the most sense to you. I'll give it another 30 seconds or so we can get the answers in, then we'll have a quick reflection on what we're seeing, and then we can move on. Still time to click on one of these options and see we've only got a small number of the participants clicked so far. So just look for the poll window and click whichever of these really represents your position. That's it, a few more votes coming in now. Last 10 seconds. Okay, we'll end the poll there. And let me just share the results. So a really even split here. Interestingly, there's not anyone on the Zoom session today who knows exactly what your bots are doing and the impact they have. And don't worry, this isn't unusual. And then we've got a really even split in these other areas. Some have got high containment, and assuming that's good. Some just aren't getting any complaints, and some just no reporting. So I think this session is going to be helpful for all of you. We're going to talk about containment and how that can sometimes be misleading. We're going to talk about how you can go deeper and learn more about what your bots are doing, and really build a whole framework for not just what to measure and how to measure it, but then what to do with the information that you get. So I'll stop the poll there and let's dive into it. So here's my framework for bot analytics. And it starts with a very famous quote from the management consultant Peter Drucker, who said, "What gets measured gets managed." And I think this is true, but only if you know how to manage what you're measuring. And a quick aside story, I recently decided to get on top of my lockdown weight gain. And something that really helped was a comment from Peter Attia, who summarized the whole of weight management with 3 levers. Dietary restrictions, essentially cutting out some foods like low carb or vegetarian, vegan or paleo. Your time restriction, like intermittent fasting could be 5-2 or 16-8. And then you've got calorie restriction, just eating less. And armed with these 3 levers and a set of scales to measure, I'm back at my wedding weight. I'm the same weight I was when I got married, actually the same weight as I was when I first met my wife nearly 15 years ago. And it feels good. It's empowering to know you have a framework for achieving important goals. And I tell this story because I think the same applies to IVR and chatbots. If you don't keep an eye on them by measuring their performance, they can easily get out of hand, like my weight did over lockdown. I think it's unlike human agents. Your bots won't tell you when customers are getting frustrated or the API is turning out or a business process changed, but their script didn't. They're just going to keep having terrible conversation with customers at scale. And that's where bot analytics comes in. But most IVR and chatbot platforms, they have terrible reporting. There's just no like Google Analytics for conversational AI yet. So you have to build it yourselves. But what do you need? So I like to think of bot analytics like this. At the top, we've got performance. So how well is the system working? At the bottom, we've got diagnostics, which is how is the system and the user in the back end behaving? How are they interacting? And at the core of it, you've got event logging, capturing the information which is going to let you understand performance and diagnostics. So this is the measure of Peter Drucker's and what gets measured gets managed. But we need to go further than that. And the great thing is that when we're looking at both performance and diagnostics, they allow us to start managing. So performance drives prioritization. Where's the real benefit coming from? Where would it be worth doubling down and to deliver more benefit? And diagnostics drives design context. So giving your bot strategists and your designers the information they need to make smart decisions about how to improve the experience. I'm going to use this framework to guide us through today's presentation. Let's start with how well is the system working? Performance. And let's talk about containment, because everyone in this industry uses containment, and it's easy to see why, because it's a really simple metric. You take the total number of contacts that don't end up interacting with an agent, and you divide it by the total number of contacts received. You get a simple percentage, which is supposed to be the higher, the better. But the problem is this simple metric actually has 2 different contributing factors. Excuse me. You've got positive containment, which is where someone calls up or they have a chat session, they get the information they need and they hang up or they walk away happy. Great, that's exactly what we're looking for. But the problem is that containment also includes what we call negative containment. So the system endlessly bashing away trying to understand what the customer says and not recognizing what they say, or even platform issues or back-end issues, meaning that we're hanging up on the customer, or even just telling the customer to hang up and call a different number. All of these contribute to a higher containment number, but it's not good containment. And so I really think you should go beyond containment and start thinking about your IVR and your chatbots as automated agents doing tasks. And they've got a to-do list. They might start with reason for contact. Why is this person got in contact with us today? Typically, they'll need to identify and verify or authenticate the customer to make sure they know who they're talking to and it really is who they say they are. And then you just start doing what an agent would do, maybe give status of a claim or a purchase or a delivery, for example. Maybe send or text message a link to a customer to a tracking service or to get updates on their order. And then sometimes we need to escalate to a specialist. So the bot's got a bunch of tasks it needs to do. And I think this is where we need to start with really understanding performance. So let's dive now into what happens within each task. And it's really simple. We start a task and hopefully we complete it. Great news, we've delivered some benefit. But it doesn't always come out this way. Sometimes something goes wrong and we're unable to complete the task. And so we failed at helping the customer with that task. And this is normally as far as people go with tasks, but I think there's one other important outcome, which is what I would call flow complete. And this is where the system's done everything that an agent would do, but wasn't able to complete the task. And this might be because, maybe it was a payment transaction and the payment got declined. Or maybe it was that the customer's calling to cancel an order, but it's already out for delivery and you just can't cancel it. We didn't complete the task for the customer, but we did everything an agent could do. And we need to credit the bot with achieving that, because if the bot didn't do it, the agent would have to. So now we're thinking about tasks and different types of task success. Let's come back to containment. Maybe we call it Containment 2.0. And let's think about the different alternatives. We've got a task start and a completion. Yeah, your package was delivered or will be delivered at 7 p.m. And if the customer hangs up or walks away from the chat session happy, that's positive containment. Then we've got a task starting, and maybe the system says, oh, I need your claims number to check on the status of your claim. Maybe at that point, the customer hangs up or walks away. That's not a task fail. Probably the reason they hung up or walked away is they didn't have that claims number handy and they've gone to get it. So it's not positive containment, but nor is it negative containment. We tend to call those sort of things neutral containment. And then we've got a task start, and then there's a breakdown in communication. Maybe there's a problem on the API, or there's a problem in interacting with the customer. We can't get information and they hang up out of frustration or walk away from the chat session out of frustration. That's negative containment. So now we're starting to think about tasks. We can actually start to get a little bit smarter about the types of containment that we report. But even just containment, I don't think is enough, because it assumes that there's the same value in each call that we contain, but that's just not the case. Each task that we have on our to-do list, or our bots have on their to-do list, has got a different value. And the value typically is the amount of time it saves an agent, which an agent can reallocate to more productive tasks or productive interactions with customers, or maybe just reduce the total volume or capacity of agents you're going to need. And I think the best way to do this is to look at how long would it have taken an agent to do this. So it's not how long does the customer spend in IVR or chat, but how long does it save an agent? Might be 15 seconds for understanding what the reason for call is, 45 seconds to identify and verify. Given a status of an order could take 30 seconds, and it might take the same amount of time for an agent to look up the status and report, well, I'm sorry, we don't have an update on that yet, you'll need to call back. So whether that's complete or flow complete, we've still got 30 seconds benefit there. And then perhaps we text a link so they can follow up on another channel. So in total, we've perhaps contained a 2-minute call there when the customer hangs up or walks away from their chat session after getting that link. But we could have a non-contained call where we text the link and they get that okay, but then they go on to speak to an agent about another task, or to go deeper on the query they started with the chatbot. Now, as long as you pass the data into the agent desktop of the agent that's receiving the call or the chat, then none of this time is wasted. And so we've got 2 minutes saving in agent time, even though we haven't contained the call. And I think it's really important to consider this partial automation, because we often see that as much as a third or even more of the benefits of systems can come from these kind of benefits, where partial automation saves time from agents, but it doesn't actually contain a call. So we've covered the performance side of things. Let's now talk about event logging. How do we capture the information we need to analyze the performance based on the tasks we discussed? A really common way to do it, that's supported by a lot of the platforms, is to log the start and the end of each task and the outcome, whether it's a success or a failure of each task. And this is really great because it allows you to do the kind of performance analytics we've been talking about. The problem is, though, when you change your mind about the information you want, and something that I've learned is that as soon as you share good data, good information with people within a business, it begs more questions. And if you're just using the markers that you programmed into your application, and then someone says, "Oh, but what about these two different variants of IDMV, or what about IDMV that's done for different segments of our contact?" It then becomes really difficult to understand that unless you go in and plug in new markers, and then you've got to wait a few hours, days, or weeks to gather enough information to analyze your performance again. So a better way, I think, if you can achieve it, is actually to log much more granular events about literally each state change in an application. And this doesn't have to be, a state in a directed dialogue. Any automation system goes through a series of states, and the state changes as a result of input from the customer or the results of back-end lookups. And if we capture each of those states, what happened in each of those states, then we can look at that data after the fact and look for sequences of events of particular types and label them with task start and task end. And the great thing about that is we can label and relabel as much as we want. So that might allow us to go deeper and say, okay, so we're getting a lot of failures in this IDMV task. Why is that? Look, the majority that are failing, actually, they're starting with trying to look up the customer's telephone number, and that's failing. So then we're having to do manual IDMV. So it's not the auto IDMV, it's the manual IDMV that's the problem. And look here, it's the zip code capture that's really causing the issue. And we'll talk later about what you might do with this in terms of how do you manage based on the information you find. But just suffice to say, at the very least, put your task markers in so you know what the start and end of tasks are, account for success, failure, and flow complete. But better if you can log much more granular information. And beware, when we first got into doing this, we logged a lot of information. It all seemed great for the first few months, but when you start getting millions or even hundreds of millions of entries in your database, it can become tough to run the queries on small database instances. So if you're going to go this route, you do need to consider the technology you're using. Maybe leverage a cloud platform which is really capable of handling large volumes of data at scale. Then finally, we get to diagnostics. How is the system, user, and backend behaving? And why do we need to know this? Well, the performance metrics tell you how well the system is working. How many tasks of different kinds are started, how many of those fail, complete, or flow complete. But to diagnose good or bad performance, to see why it's happening, we need to dive deeper, and we need to look inside the evolving state of our application. And like I said, whether it's a directed dialogue system or a different paradigm, it's got state. And each state has different outcomes. It could be that it's successful, the backend API lookup is successful, or the customer provides the information we're looking for, and we continue to the next state. Customer journey flows exactly as we'd hoped it would. It could be that we don't get the input that we're looking for from the customer. Maybe they give no response, or maybe they give an ambiguous response or a response we can't understand. And then we need to retry. And there's conversation design techniques that we'll cover in webinar 3 in this series, where we'll talk about that kind of thing. But suffice to say, sometimes we just got to retry to gather the information that we're looking for. And sometimes we're unsuccessful at doing that, and the customer will hang up frustrated. There might be other reasons why the customer hangs up, like I said earlier on. And so within each state of the application, this is typically the pattern we see. We're either continuing to the next state, we're retrying within the current state, or there's a hang up or the end of a chat session. And the reason that each of these happen come down to business rules. So perhaps the customer is on a very important person list, and so we're not going to put them through automation. We want to send them straight to a specified agent group. It might be that the customer is in debt, and we don't want to put them through the normal payment process. We want to send them to an agent that's trained to work carefully with people who are in debt. It could be that there are multiple orders on file, and the system just isn't designed to handle multiple orders. That's something that we tend to leave to agents because it's a more complex interaction. Then there's user behavior. So, customers can be a bit avoidant sometimes, and not wanting to engage with automation. They can be hesitant to respond. They can get a little bit confused and respond with something that we didn't expect. And they can get frustrated, and they can bash buttons and try and zero out. They can swear, or just provide utterances that are kind of meaningless to the system. So there's lots of user behavior that we want to be able to analyze here. And then we've got natural language understanding issues, which might be environmental issues or side speech misrecognitions or false accepts, where we think someone said something and actually said something different. There could be technical issues like problems in the telephony perhaps, or back-end systems. And then you can get unexpected behavior. So when the system doesn't behave as the design, and this is typically because there's a bug when the design was implemented, or there's been a change that wasn't documented. But ultimately, there's a lot of different things that can happen within a state that help us diagnose why are not as many customers as we'd hope, for example, progressing to the next state, and instead we're getting retries, or we're getting customers hang up, or we're hanging up on them. Now, once we've started looking at what's going on within each state and categorizing it into these different types of outcome, then we can really dive deep into the customer journey. This is an example we did analyzing one of our client systems, going through the upfront menu, the ID using the telephone number, and then looking up an order. And I've not made it big enough to see the details, but what we can do is where we get more transfers or hangups than we would expect. We can highlight that in orange or in red when we've got a fairly large number. And what this means is we've highlighted the problem. We've highlighted what is causing the system to get less task completion than we would like. So we've covered the essentials of bot analytics. We've looked at understanding performance and diagnosing why you're getting the outcomes you're getting, and of course the event logging that drives both of these kinds of analysis. But once you've measured, as I said at the beginning, you've got to manage. So let's talk about bot management. As I mentioned earlier, bot management is a continuous cycle of improvement driven by data. So it starts with bot analytics. That's the yellow box at the bottom there, and that gives us the inputs we need to do bot strategy. We know what can our bots do, what should they do, what's it worth, and then we update our conversation design, we build it, we deploy it, and then we get new data. But critically, bot analytics informs strategy and design. So that's where the arrows in our analytics framework come in. We can use performance to prioritize where we're going to focus our efforts, where we're underperforming and we want to fix the issue, or where we're doing well and we want to double down. And then we've got diagnostics, which gives the context for design and helps architects and designers understand how to change things so they work better. And that's where the 3 levers of conversational AI improvement come in. So just like Peter Attia's 3 levers of weight management I mentioned at the start of this webinar, These three interventions address the common reasons why you're not getting the outcomes you want. They are speech recognition or natural language understanding, conversation design, and business rules and backend. Essentially, by pulling 1, 2, or 3 of these levers, you can improve task performance within your IVR voice and chatbots. Now, speech recognition and natural language understanding, here's where you're trying to tune the speech recognition and improve the natural language understanding model, maybe the grammars you're using or the intents and entities that you specified in a more modern conversational AI platform, to make sure the system understands what customers are saying and what they mean by that. And so we can use the data that we have from within states, where if we've got a state where people are dropping out a lot, we can see, why is it that we're not understanding what they're saying. We can look at the things that they're saying or they're inputting via chat, and check that our speech recognition and natural language understanding models are properly understanding those, and they're not, update the configurations that they do. Second up, we've got conversation design. And it's all about changing the design so it feels more natural and effortless to your customer, so it really speaks their language. So it might be that the prompts, the things the system is saying, are not resonating with the customer, not causing a customer to act in the way that we need them to act to help them. Maybe we're not being specific enough about where they can find their account number or which telephone number we're asking for. Maybe we're not being clear enough that this isn't something that an agent can provide any more information on, so there's no need to go through and speak to an agent about it. Maybe we need to give someone more confidence that a task is being completed by providing or maybe texting them a transaction ID or payment code to give them comfort that the system has really got what they needed and completed the task on their behalf. And there's a third, and actually, business rules and backend can be some of the biggest contributors to loss of performance, much more so often than you would expect, compared to understanding and conversation design. Otherwise, brilliant designs can fail to deliver on the expected outcomes if business rules or API timeouts are sending customers to agents when they could be helped by bots. So revisit your business rules. If you're sending people directly to agents rather than taking them through to automation, it might have been the right idea at the time, but is it still the case? Is your data up to date? So are you sending the right people direct to agents that you should be? Like maybe those VIPs we talked about, regular customers, or customers with particularly sensitive needs, like those in debt. And a big one is API timeouts, or just the information coming from the back end just not conforming to what the system expects. And of course, the bots can only do what they're told. And so if the API is not giving the bots the information they need, or it's coming back in a form that they're not designed to accept, then this is going to really trash your task completion. So look at each of these 3 levers when trying to decide how to improve a system where you're measuring an opportunity, or low task completion, or even high task completion. You want to double down and improve it. Now, I think this is where you can actually go a step beyond in terms of the management process, and not just consider these 3 levers, but then analyze the impact that it's going to have. And there's lots of ways to do it, but a really simple way that we found that's really transparent and quite useful is to take the data you have about the customer journeys and map it out in a spreadsheet, almost like a tree. So everyone starts at the main menu, and then they'll pick different options, and this is whether it's a directed dialogue menu or it's an intent-based system. They're still going to get directed to a certain place, whether that's an agent or automation. So consider each of those possible outcomes, and then where do they go next? What are the options? And you can build up this tree of different possibilities. And using the diagnostic data you have, you can then put against each of those branches the percentage of customers going each route. And then you can use that information coupled with the 3 levers, and you can say, so what if we improve the understanding and speech recognition perhaps in this area, so that rather than 60% of people being successful in completing ID&V, we get to 65 or 70%. And you can try to change that number and see what outcome that has. How many more people then go down that path, which maybe keeps them in automation and delivers more benefit in terms of seconds of agent time saved. And you can do the same for the conversational design. What if we improve the design here so more people were able to find their account number? Or what if we were able to improve the back-end system so that we got 5 or 10% less timeouts, or we got the data we need to support the customer 5 or 10% more? You can just plug in those different numbers into this probability tree and see the impact on the outcomes. And this really helps you drive the whole bot management system. So let's talk about how bot analytics really fits in. The key inputs to bot analytics are your business objectives. What are you trying to achieve? Your business case, what do you value, and what are you expecting to achieve? And what are the KPIs that will measure success? And then take those into your bot analytics process, and then the output needs to be performance. How did I do? That's the top part of the framework. Opportunities. So what levers could we pull? Which of those 3 levers of conversational AI improvement could we pull to improve the performance? And then using that probability tree approach that I just introduced, forecast the impact. Now, the great thing about this is this really starts to embed analytics in an operational framework within your business, so that you're looking at the right things because you're aware of what the business objectives, business case, and KPIs are. You're using bot analytics, as we've talked about, and the 3 levers of improvement to then identify what your performance is, what opportunities there are to improve, and what could the impact be. And then just to summarize, the tasks you need to do within bot management is, first, you've got to define the tasks. What are the tasks that are important, that deliver value within your business because they save agents time? And how would you define them? What sequence of events is the start of that task, and what sequence of events is the end of that task? And remember, the end can be success, failure, or flow complete. Once we define the task, we then obviously need to make sure we're logging all these events. And again, log as granular as you can, because that's going to give you much more flexibility to go back and refine your task definitions and be able to rerun the analysis on the same event data without having to program in new task markers and rerun, redeploy and then rerun the system. So once you define your tasks and you're logging the right events, then of course you need to calculate metrics. So using those events, counting them up to see how many people attempted each task and how many were successful, failure, or flow complete. And then model the performance, attribute a value to each of those outcomes and add up the benefit. And then of course use that model to do that what if analysis. What if we could turn the lever up a little bit and get better speech recognition or understanding in that particular state? What if we could modify the design to keep more people on track here? What if we could improve our backend data or the performance of our APIs to make sure the bots have got the data they need to interact with the customer? So these are really the 4 steps that you need to implement to really build out a bot analytics process and practice within your business. So quick summary, and then we'll go to questions. Firstly, define the tasks that deliver value for your customer and for your business, and then get data. And look, start with what you've got. I know most people don't have the data they want or need, but just start with what you've got and then get granular, more granular over time, because you'll quickly see where the gaps in your data are. Of course, analyze the data you've collected to understand task performance, and then go deeper to diagnose why you're getting that particular outcome. And then identify opportunities to improve using those 3 levers of improvement within conversational AI. And then importantly, you need to forecast the impact of each opportunity and prioritize it. There's so many things you could do with your IVR or chatbot or voice assistant. There's so many things you could do in customer service and customer experience outside of conversational AI. So it's really important to understand what is the impact of each opportunity you've identified and prioritizing that both within your program, but also across the other programs you might be responsible for. And then the great thing about this approach is you can then hold yourself, your team, and your bots to account in delivering the outcomes that they're built for. So I hope this has been helpful in terms of laying out my framework for bot analytics as part of the overall bot management framework that we're covering in this 3-webinar series. Now we do have about just under 10 minutes to take any questions. So let me just switch and see what questions we have. Okay, I've got one question here. Gosh, seems like a lot of work. Is it, is the juice really worth the squeeze? Really well put. Look, I think it's a really good question, and we should always be asking ourselves, is the cost, time, effort to do this, really worth the investment in time? And I saw this, early in my career, and I'm sure a lot of us have experienced this, where we started down a path and we feel committed to it, and there's all these things that we should be doing, and there's a pressure to prune, and this really happens a lot in conversational AI, particularly around bot analytics and around data. And I think the reason is because it's not often built in well. Everything I've talked about today, there's some support for it at some level in some contact center platforms, some IVR platforms, but there's no real sort of, like I said at the beginning, bot like Google Analytics for conversational AI. So we do have to do a lot of this legwork ourselves. And projects I've been involved with, especially if there's none of this infrastructure, you can spend maybe 30, 40, even 50% of the project budget and the project time building out your event logging, building out your task definitions, building out your performance analytics, building out your performance model to see what outcomes you're getting and to consider how changes might impact the outcome. So there's a lot there. And I think the answer to this for me is, what are we doing this for in the first place? We're not building conversational AI just for fun. I mean, look, we love this stuff. It's interesting. It's the cutting edge of technology. It's the cutting edge of customer experience. But ultimately, there's other things we could be spending our time and our money on. We could have more agents on the phone or on chat. We could invest in workforce optimization to help our agents be more successful. But we invest in conversational AI because it enables us, for certain subsets of the contact types that we receive, to give really good, consistent, immediate service to customers. So there's real value there. But we can't just expect that value to flow from our project. In fact, the reality is that most projects, when they deploy, don't get the outcomes that you expect, because as much as we do the research and we do great conversation design and even usability testing with end customers, we don't really know for sure how customers will interact with our systems until we go live and they contact reality, and that's when we find out how it's performing. So I guess I'd put it this way: I think you'd be better to deploy half the amount of functionality and have analytics around it, such that once it's deployed, you can really see what's working and what's not, validate back to your business case, and drive further investments into exactly the right place that's going to give the maximum ROI from further investment. You're much better to go for half the scope, but have that analytics capability and use it, than you are to try and do a whole lot more and not have the analytics in there, and literally deploy and just hope for the best. And in fact, the only way you'd know if things were okay is if no one complained. And you'll never know really what impact you've had, except at very high level metrics in terms of, did the volume of contacts going through to the contact center decrease or increase, and did the amount of time the agent spent on the phone increase or decrease? But there's so many other things, seasonal changes, process changes, product changes, etc., that can affect that. The only way you really know the impact the bots are having is by analyzing them, measuring them, and then using those three levers to drive improvements. So good question. I do think the juice is worth the squeeze, so much so that I'd, to extend the metaphor probably too far, I'd have half a lemon and squeeze the juice out of that rather than having a whole lemon and no analytics juice. I'm not quite sure of that, if that analogy worked. Okay. Any more questions? Just drop them into the chat or into the Q&A. Okay, so what's a good containment number? And this is a great question, right? And I get asked all the time, and I'm sure you've been asked this question, or you've asked yourself this question. So if we're going to use containment, what's good? And unfortunately, the answer is there is no straight answer to that. I've had systems that have delivered fantastic ROI, fantastic customer experience on 20% containment overall. I've had other systems where we've achieved 70, 80% containment. And this is good containment, right? This isn't, all that terrible, people hanging up frustrated and treating it as a good interaction. But you can be misled. And I had a very formative experience of mine when it comes to containment, because we had a customer in the Caribbean that we had a small amount of automation in their system, but it wasn't huge. And one day, the customer calls up and says, we seem to be getting like 80% containment. I'm really impressed with the system. And I'm like, I don't know. That doesn't seem right to me. It's just not enough tasks in the system to get 80% containment. And so we started digging in, and it was pretty clear that the containment wasn't good containment. People were just hanging up within a few seconds of the interaction, without even interacting with the system at all. And I was like, why is this? Why the sudden change? And so we actually had to go beyond the analytics data we had in the system and start listening to end-to-end calls to see what's happening. And then it became obvious, because when you listen to the calls, it was all like, you couldn't hear the menus at all. And some of them you could hear the menu, but there was just no interaction from the customer. It turned out that this was a telco, and they'd done a network upgrade across their cell towers in the region, and something had gone wrong. And as a result, calls were connecting, but the audio wasn't going through properly. And so the majority of this 80% containment, unfortunately, was coming from customers who couldn't hear what the system was saying at all, or where the system was just ignoring what they were saying or any buttons they pressed. So I think the lesson is, don't rely on containment on its own. If someone asks you, what's good containment, it really varies across industries, and it really varies within industries. The only way to know what good looks like for you is to build a bot strategy that identifies where your bots could do well, makes an estimate of how successful they can be and what's that worth. And actually, that is exactly what we're going to be covering in our second webinar in a couple of weeks. We're going to be looking at bot strategy with me and my director of bot strategy, Daniel Aslett, and we'll take you through the 8 steps to build a brilliant bot strategy. So thank you for joining. Thank you for staying on for the questions. If you do have any other questions that I wasn't able to cover, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. There's my contact details there. And if you want more of this, I do a weekly newsletter, completely non-salesy. It's all about educating and sharing with you what I've learned, what I'm seeing in the world of conversational AI. So feel free to check out that link and subscribe to the weekly email. With that, thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks for our bot strategy webinar.